So
Thank
Jim,
you.
I
Rudy.
haven't gotten to read much of your book, but I know it's got a particular theme. What is it?
Well, it's called West, Poems of a Place, and it's about and based on the fact that my wife and I, who have been city people all our lives, about 12 years ago, moved out to the country and changed our minds and lives and what we see and who we are. It changed everything.
And so what would you say is the central thing that changed in moving from here to there? And I know you're still come to the city and work and
Sure.
do all your literary stuff, but what about living in the country has changed particularly?
Well, there's a poem I'm going to read called Time Times, which is about the change in time. I think there's a change in view. I was struck by the multiple directions prayer because there's a poem which refers to my full 360, which is, again, these are not things you get in city life very often. And the book is not an anti-city book so much as it's how I changed. It's also about how that happened, because it doesn't happen immediately. City folk, when they move to the country, have some things to get used to. So, Rudy, I'm going to start, though, every time I read anywhere, and I read a lot, I read at least one poem by one of my students from the Juvenile Detention Center. I teach there every fall for Gemini Inc., and I read a poem of theirs because they can't, and because you need to hear their voices, and because I want you to keep them in your thoughts. This is by Rodrigo. I am from the ghetto where people are afraid to walk alone at night. I am from the hood where thugging is misunderstood. I am from a poor family, but yet we're still family. I am from a 2-bedroom house, but it's home. I am from the streets, but I do not stand alone. This is my temple, so I will keep moving on. It's a great joy for me to work with those folks, and it's also a great sadness and a great pain, and they're 14 to 17 years old, incarcerated. Keep them in your thoughts, please. So, West, Poems of a Place, with a photograph of me on the back by Carl Franklin, who many of you know. So, this is first poem, and it is not the first poem in the book. Just oddly enough, actually the first poem in the book is called Opening Day, so this is first poem. Yesterday, the first western meadowlark of the season arrived at the feeder. I won both games of Scrabble, but that was yesterday. In the light and warmth of another year, we are captivated by tiny orange flowers amid the parched, the straw yellow, the cracking earth. Mesquites bend, creak, break, their reaching limbs desperate for water. The drought did not just appear. Weeks of no rain, and when some, not enough, have brought us here. When Dennis went to split the large pieces from the wood pile, they just crumbled. When we opened the fire and got them caught, they were consumed to ash. Through blinds, slats, the sun of now makes hexagrams on the tile. I'll not ask about the future, nor will I dwell in the past. Touch the moment. Let this warm sun gather, pool. Listen to the voices of friends, the clack whir of grasshoppers. Behold the grace of a dragonfly in still air. Pick up the twist of barbed wire, a way to think about time and all our strivings for presence, for firstness, and hang it on the hook on the front of the barn, a talisman to remember this first moment. This is a small description of the world. This seemed like a kind of humble way to say it. A small description of the world. I thought the meadow's wash of wildflowers went so far into the distance that I was able to see the rim of the world, the curve. They gave me an optical definition of what I'd seen, but I was looking for a spiritual one. I think the edge of the world does more than blur. There are several longer poems in the book about the accommodating this change, learning, and this is one of them. This is called Revisions, Living Through Change. A small poem about the end of things. The sun still streams through big leaves. Cats come, different cats. My hands are sore from packing books. The library's red peeks through the trees. We write a different address on the return corner of the birthday cards. What more could we do now if we wanted to live deliberately? Is time different here? The pulse of the trill of a bird, the interval between the times the air conditioning roars on, a different stove, different kettle, same coffee, the time it takes to read the morning paper when you wait until evening to read it, talking to folks in the checkout line, drawl, a word takes longer to honey out. The speed one walks across the parking lot in the heat, highway at 80, counting a row of trees, grass growing, how quickly the poison kills the wasps, how quickly they come back, or how often, how much they must like it here, how much we do. I will learn each tree, its lean, its roots, its sympathies, the way it takes the sky, the look of years on it, a season's shifts and changes. I will learn each tree, its conversation with the breeze, what the bark feels like on my hands. I will learn each tree, not to make them mine, but as a way of making new friends. Big changes take deep breaths, stands in his waist-high grass, stands of trees. The folks in the stands are treated to a one-hitter, masterfully spun. The spider's web looks like screening, even, gridded. Deep breaths, the smell of earth, of grass, of cat food, of thick air. Big changes on the little bend humble him with how little he knows, how little he can do but word play. Daybreak, from my kitchen through the trees all the way to the back fence, distance measured in the space between trees, in the length of a cat, skinny, full loping across the space between trees. There's a whole group of cows in the book because I've become fascinated by looking at them, and so the ruminant beasts, a whole group of cattle egrets in the book, a whole group of coyotes in the book. So ghost cows. Ghost cows. Brahmas in night field. Could they be as light as smoke? Might they be white kites in for a landing, grounded for the night? We drive by too fast, in a hurry to get home, to do anything more than comment on them, silent in the night field, and then a bend in the road, a grove of trees, and they're gone. Could they be the largest fireflies on record? They glow and hover, but only how things with hooves might hover. Hardly, and on the earth. We mention them all the way home, remembering them, splashing them against our inner eye, like spilled milk, like mistakes, like memories. And we are haunted by them, the ghost cows. When cattle egrets fold, flap, soar, veer, they make the sky. They open rooms in the flat blue, tilting startlingly white in the sun. They create distance, a blue box of air they're crossing. I'm watching them even now when the temperature is rising and grasshoppers, nopal, and cows try their level best to keep me to the ground. One cattle egret, two, a whole split level of rooms with views, though this is no suburb. And when I'm with them, I soar until scissortails do their job and cut the sky, the wings, the day to ribbons, and the ribbons float silent to the meadows, bedeck the cows. Heartful. A cattle egret, paper airplane of no smart kid, bed sheet of no dreaming couple kicked free, lightning flash with no rain, plummets from the sky, off wind, lands primly, a lily of the open range, walking under the immensity of cows. You kind of figure that. Okay, this is times, and it really, it's a list poem. So get with it doesn't have much rhythm because it's a list. There are two jazz references which you could pick up on should you wish. Times. How long for the water in the shower to warm up? The number of times the coyote stopped and turned in the meadow when I called out to it. The time it takes for the window in the shower to steam up and the treetops to be shrouded in steam after the water warms up. The time between the visits of the western meadowlarks in migration and how long they stay. For a plant to grow, for a fire to die out enough so I can put my hands on the ashes. Brubeck, mowing the whole lawn and not in a single day, to end something that has gone on a long time. Innings. From first horn to last flicking tail, in my window, the cows crossing the meadow from far grazing to sleep out from the sun under the aged oak. From this moment on, how commercials make films even longer than they are. Calendar pages, tree rings, pumps, fakes, times his jump until the defender is out of his face. Between endangered and extinct. Walking out onto the back porch late at night, security light still out. How long will it take for us to get it fixed? And very little light from the house spilling into the back, so waiting, watching, long enough for my eyes to adjust to the dark, long enough to see moonlight and tree shadows, to breathe night, and wait for senses, to become presences. And then the world out there is filled with stuff that gets hit by cars that are going too fast and doesn't see them. And you'll see how that. This is cycle and then recycle. Cycle. Little tiny poem, all one word down the list. It's the shape of poems does matter. My publisher said my lines were too long, which is why this book had to be square. And many of you may know my publisher, Bryce Milligan of Wings Press, who we are blessed to have in our community. Cycle. The wheel on the gate, drought, the rain, the mud, the drought again, hard bakes, the rut, the bounce, the loosening, eccentric in rust and dust, the breakdown, the gate stuck, the wheel won't, the farm supply, and yet another wheel on the gate, turning. That's cycle. And then this is recycle. When a white plastic bag, tattered in the wind and hooked on a fence, lengthens, bends, takes on gesture, a kind of grace. When a white plastic bag becomes a cattle egret in this limitless origami that is the earth unfolding, it's time to rethink the horse costume and the baggy legs that cannot possibly approximate equine beauty. And time to stop the car at what has festered and fumed and dried to leather all hot July long, and get out of the car and look for bones, to make a flute, to carve a cattle egret, to start again. And this last is actually kind of a postscript to the book. You don't stop writing about place when you finish the book about place. And it's actually written for Moby Warren and Kamala Platt and Marisol Cortez, who are members with me in a group called Stone and Stream, which is an environmental activist, artist, writers group, which I commend to you. And it's called West News from the Little Bend of South View. The urban left had it somewhat easier. They didn't have to make the choice between being peasant or landowner. Intelligentsia worker is not quite the same thing. And while we all still struggle with the victim-executioner one, owning land does present some ticklish questions. I used to have Proudhon's quote, "Property is theft," inscribed on the side of one of my bookshelves. But again, those were books. So irony or not, hoarding seemed almost acceptable. Less so in these days of the little free libraries. Yes, we were the land before the land was ours, but that mostly meant a suburb backyard with willow tree or various patches of next to no grass and much concrete in quite a few cities. Now it's acres, enough land that half we keep wild, if leaving it be can be considered keeping, and the other half takes more than one day of mowing on the riding mower. So I know, as I know very little else, they are not my trees. And not just because they will outlive me. Back to books then, or to the people inside them, to Ed Abbey and Aldo Leopold for some help with this, and to Craggy Henry, who never claimed ownership, though he nearly burned the whole woods down. The trees belong to themselves. They've made this deal to grace my vision, shade my eyes, help me see the grasses and the dirt and the weeds, what we call weeds, some wind-intentional plants, the ants, and all the other glorious anarchy of my West. Thank you.